The 50 caliber rounds come from nowhere. German infantry soldiers, their breath visible in the frozen January air, drop into the snow-covered fields of Alsace. They scan the tree line, search the farmhouses, look for the American position. The machine gun fire comes again. Not from the woods, not from the buildings. From somewhere impossible. From the burning wreck. The M10 tank destroyer has been aflame for 20 minutes. Black smoke pours from its ruptured fuel tank, climbing into the gray sky above Holtzwihr, France. Every German soldier advancing across those fields knows what a burning tank destroyer means. It means the crew is dead or gone. It means empty steel and spreading fire. It means you walk past it to kill the Americans hiding in the woods beyond. But this one is shooting back. The machine gun swivels with mechanical precision. Another burst. 3 more Germans fall. The advancing infantry formation breaks apart, men diving for whatever cover they can find in the frozen farm field. Officers shout orders that get lost in the wind and the roar of flames and the crack of that impossible 50 caliber. The math doesn't work. Burning vehicles don't shoot. Dead crews don't aim. The Germans have 6 Panzer tanks and 250 infantry pushing forward. The American line has already broken. This should be a simple mop-up operation. But someone is still on that burning tank destroyer. Someone is still behind that gun. The temperature is 18 degrees Fahrenheit. The smoke from the M10 mixes with the fog rolling across the Colmar Pocket. The smell of burning diesel and hot metal carries across the field. The machine gun fires again and again. The Germans try to advance. The gun cuts them down. They try to flank left. The gun traverses. They try to flank right. More bodies in the snow. The tank destroyer's ammunition might cook off at any moment. The fuel fire is spreading. Any sane man would have abandoned that position 10 minutes ago. What they didn't know was that the man on that flaming wreck had already killed more enemies than most entire platoons would see in the entire war. What they didn't know was that he'd been rejected by every branch of the military for being too small, too light, too unremarkable. What they didn't know was that this undersized farm boy from Texas had already become the most decorated soldier in American service, and he was standing on top of a bomb with a phone in one hand and death in the other. What they didn't know was that they were about to become a footnote in a legend that would define American courage for generations to come. January 26, 1945, near Holtzwihr, France. 1 man, 1 hour, 240 Germans would never go home. This is what impossible looks like. To understand how one 5'5" farm boy could hold off an entire German company while standing on a burning vehicle, you need to understand January 1945. You need to understand the Colmar Pocket. You need to understand what desperation looks like when it wears a uniform. The Colmar Pocket was a German salient jutting into Allied-controlled Alsace, a bulge in the map that represented everything wrong with the final winter of the European War. Hitler had ordered the Wehrmacht to hold every inch of German territory. But Alsace wasn't German territory. It was French soil that had been French soil when the war started, and would be French soil when it ended. That didn't matter to the Wehrmacht. Orders were orders. 8 German divisions, nearly 50,000 men, dug into the frozen fields and forests around Colmar. They weren't going anywhere. The Americans and French forces surrounding them were stretched thin. Every available division was needed for the push into Germany itself. The Colmar Pocket was a distraction, a dangerous bulge that tied down troops needed elsewhere. The strategy was to reduce it slowly, methodically, without wasting men on frontal assaults into prepared defensive positions. Conservative tactics, measured advances, the kind of warfare that preserved lives and won wars through patience. The German High Command had different ideas. On January 25, 1945, 6 Panzer tanks and multiple companies of Wehrmacht infantry launched a counteroffensive aimed at breaking through the American lines and relieving pressure on the pocket. The 15th Infantry Regiment, 3rd Infantry Division, was directly in their path. Company B was positioned in frozen woods near Holtzwihr, a small farming village that had changed hands 3 times already that winter. The Americans were outnumbered 6-1. They had 2 M10 tank destroyers for support. They had artillery on call if the phone lines held. They had cold rations, frozen hands, and the knowledge that retreat meant exposing the entire flank. They had a company commander named Captain Mosley, who knew the line had to hold, and they had First Lieutenant Audie Murphy. The numbers tell you everything and nothing. Murphy was 19 years old. He stood 5 feet 5 inches tall. He weighed 110 pounds when he'd enlisted. The Marine Corps had rejected him, too small. The Navy had rejected him, too light. The Army Air Corps had rejected him, not enough education. The Army Infantry had finally accepted him, probably because the Army Infantry needed bodies more than it needed requirements, and in 1942, bodies were the most valuable commodity America had. But by January 1945, Audie Murphy wasn't just a body. He was a legend in the making, and everyone in the 15th Infantry knew it. He was born on June 20th, 1925, in Kingston, Texas, a place that barely qualified as a dot on a map. Sharecropper's son, 5th of 12 children. The kind of poverty that didn't need describing because everyone who lived through the Depression knew what it meant. His father abandoned the family when Audie was young. His mother died when he was 16. At 12 years old, Audie Murphy became the primary breadwinner for his younger siblings. He did it with a borrowed rifle and whatever game he could shoot in the woods around Kingston. Cotton couldn't be picked in winter. Crops didn't pay enough anyway. But rabbits and squirrels and deer could be sold or eaten. And Audie Murphy learned to shoot the way other children learned to read. He could hit a running rabbit at 50 yards. He could judge windage and distance without thinking. He could track wounded game through brush so thick other hunters gave up. Shooting wasn't a hobby. It was survival. It was how you kept your siblings fed. It was how you proved you were worth the space you took up in a world that didn't care about sharecroppers' sons. When he tried to enlist after Pearl Harbor, the recruiters saw a skinny teenager who looked 15. They saw a kid who couldn't do a pull-up. They saw someone who'd blow away in a strong wind. They didn't see the steady hands. They didn't see the hunter's patience. They didn't see what desperation and responsibility had forged in the woods of Texas. The Army took him anyway. Someone saw something. Or maybe they just needed bodies. Maybe it doesn't matter why. Company B, 15th Infantry Regiment, 3rd Infantry Division. Sicily, July 1943. Salerno, September 1943. Anzio, January 1944. Southern France, August 1944. The 3rd Infantry Division went where the dying needed doing, and Audie Murphy went with them. His service record reads like a catalog of places where the war ground men into mud. He earned his first decoration at Sicily, a Distinguished Service Cross at Anzio. Silver Stars came twice, Bronze Stars twice more. 2 Purple Hearts before January 1945, which meant 2 times the enemy got close enough to hurt him and he survived anyway. The decorations accumulated the way kill counts accumulated, not because anyone was seeking glory, but because staying alive in those places meant doing things that looked impossible to the people writing the reports afterward. Murphy didn't talk about the medals. He wore them when required and forgot them when possible. The men in Company B didn't care about medals either. They cared that Murphy could read terrain like a book. They cared that when he said to dig in here or advance there, you did it and usually lived. They cared that he led from the front, carried wounded men under fire, and never asked anyone to do something he wouldn't do first. By January 1945, First Lieutenant Audie Murphy had killed more German soldiers than anyone could accurately count. Dozens, certainly, probably more than 100. The kind of kill count that happens when you spend 18 months in continuous combat and have a talent for shooting that goes back to hungry winters in Texas. He was 19 years old. He commanded a rifle company. He weighed 125 pounds now, 15 more than when he enlisted, most of it lean muscle and scar tissue. The men who served under him called him Little Man, or Baby, or sometimes just Murph. They said it with respect. They said it with the kind of affection that combat breeds between men who've bled together. They also said he had eyes that didn't blink much, the kind of flat stare that predators have, the kind that sees you before you see it. On the morning of January 26, 1945, those eyes were watching German panzers roll across a frozen field toward his company's position. The sun hadn't quite cleared the horizon when the attack began. The fog was thick, the kind of January morning fog that turns everything beyond 50 yards into gray suggestion. Company B was positioned along the edge of a wood line, A thin defensive line stretched across frozen farm fields near Holtzwihr. They'd been there 3 days. They'd patrolled. They'd dug as deep as the frozen ground allowed. They'd positioned the 2 M10 tank destroyers, not tanks. The distinction mattered to the crews even if nobody else cared, at key points to cover the most likely approach routes. Murphy had walked the line at dawn the way he did every morning. He checked positions. He made sure the artillery observer had working communication with the batteries 3 miles back. He made sure the machine gun crews had clear fields of fire. He checked the tank destroyers, talked to their commanders, confirmed they understood the fire plan. Everything by the book, everything professional, everything that a company commander does when he knows the enemy is close and feeling aggressive. Then the fog shifted and the panzers came through it. 6 tanks, Mark IVs mostly, their engines rumbling like distant thunder, their treads chewing frozen earth. Behind them came the infantry, 250 German soldiers in winter whites, moving in practiced formations, rifles ready. This wasn't a probe. This wasn't a raid. This was a deliberate assault meant to break the American line and push through to the artillery positions beyond. The M10s opened fire first. The lead panzer took a 76mm round to its front glacis and stopped, smoke pouring from its engine compartment. The second panzer returned fire. The American infantry opened up with rifles and machine guns. The German infantry went to ground and started firing back. The mathematics of combat took over. Who had better cover? Who could maneuver? Who could mass more firepower at the critical points? The Germans had more of everything. The first M10 exploded when a panzer round hit its ammunition storage. The crew didn't have time to scream. Metal doesn't scream anyway. It just tears itself apart in fire and pressure and flying steel. The second M10 took a hit that didn't penetrate the armor, but started a fuel fire. Diesel doesn't explode the way gasoline does. It burns, thick and black and hot enough to melt through steel if you give it time. The crew knew what would happen if they stayed. They bailed out and ran for the tree line. The German infantry saw the Americans withdrawing and pressed forward. They had momentum. They had numbers. They had tanks. The American line started folding back toward the woods. Not a rout. These were experienced men who knew how to conduct a fighting withdrawal, but definitely a retreat. The defensive position was collapsing. Murphy was at his command post, a shallow hole in the frozen ground, with a field telephone connected to the artillery battalion 3 miles away. He watched his company fall back. He watched the burning M10. He watched German infantry advance in fire teams, using the smoke and terrain, professionals doing professional work. He had maybe 40 men left from the 100 who'd started the morning. The rest were casualties, scattered, or too far down the line to help. 40 men couldn't stop 250, not in open ground, not without support. He picked up the field telephone. Artillery could stop this. Artillery could drop enough high explosive on those advancing Germans to break their attack. But artillery needed someone to observe, someone to adjust fire, someone to stay where they could see the target and survive long enough to call in corrections. The burning M10 sat 200 yards forward of the tree line. Its 50 caliber machine gun was still mounted on the turret ring. The fire hadn't reached it yet. From that position, you could see the entire German advance. From that position, you could direct artillery onto the enemy formation with precision. From that position, you'd be alone, exposed, and standing on a bomb with a lit fuse. Murphy told his executive officer to pull the company back to secondary positions in the woods. He told them to dig in and prepare to counterattack when the artillery did its work. He told them clearly and calmly because panic spreads faster than a fire, and a leader's voice sets the tone for how men die. Then he walked toward the burning M10. His men watched him go. Some of them shouted. He didn't answer. The tank destroyer was burning harder now. Flames climbing from the engine compartment, black smoke pouring into the gray morning. The Germans were 100 yards away and closing. Murphy climbed onto the tank destroyer's hull, felt the heat through his boots, and settled behind the 50 caliber machine gun. The tank could explode at any second. The Germans were 100 yards away. He was alone. He picked up the field telephone handset that was still connected to the artillery net. The wire ran all the way back to his command post, then back to the batteries. Somehow, impossibly, it hadn't been cut. He pressed the handset to his ear with his left hand. With his right hand, he charged the 50 caliber machine gun. The M2 Browning 50 caliber machine gun weighs 84 pounds unloaded. It fires thumb-sized bullets at a rate of 500 rounds per minute. Its effective range is 1,800 yards. Against infantry, it doesn't wound, it destroys. Center mass hits don't drop men. They separate torsos from legs. The ammunition belts Murphy had available held approximately 800 rounds. Under normal circumstances, that's enough for 90 seconds of continuous fire. Murphy didn't plan on continuous fire. He planned on aimed bursts. He planned on making every round count the way he'd made every Somsti 2 bullet count when he was hunting rabbits to feed his siblings. He opened fire. The Germans were at 100 yards when the first burst caught them. 3 men went down. The formation hesitated. German NCOs shouted orders. The formation adjusted, tried to identify the threat. The machine gun fired again. More men fell. The Germans went prone, started returning fire. Rifle bullets cracked past Murphy's head. He ignored them. The tank destroyer hole offered some cover, not much, but some. He swiveled the .50 caliber toward the densest concentration of German infantry and fired a longer burst. 5 seconds, 25 rounds, 6 men down. He lifted the field telephone to his mouth. Fire mission, grid reference. He gave the coordinates. His voice was calm. The Artillery Battalion Fire Direction Center acknowledged. Murphy called for high explosive, impact fuses, 50 rounds. He told them to fire for effect on a position 200 yards in front of his location. 200 yards. Close enough that the shrapnel would reach him if the wind was wrong. Close enough that a short round would kill him, as dead as any German bullet. Confirm you want fire that close to friendly positions, the artillery officer said through the telephone. If you don't fire, there won't be any friendly positions, Murphy said. Fire on my command. The Germans were organizing now. They'd identified the burning M10 as the threat. Officers were directing squads to flank it, to get close enough to throw grenades or fire Panzerfausts. Murphy tracked them with the machine gun. Short bursts. 5 rounds here, 7 rounds there. The .50 caliber had a rhythm. You squeezed the butterfly trigger and the gun hammered and men fell and you moved to the next target. No wasted motion, no hesitation. The kind of shooting that comes from muscle memory and 10,000 hours of practice. 10 minutes in, the first artillery salvo arrived. The 105mm howitzer shells made a sound like freight trains falling from the sky. They hit 200 yards out and the ground erupted in geysers of frozen earth and steel fragments. Murphy watched through the smoke and flame, assessed the fall of shot. Add 50, repeat, he said into the telephone. The next salvo came 30 seconds later, closer to the German formation. Better. Fire for effect, Murphy said. The artillery battalion opened up, all 6 guns firing as fast as the crews could load. The field in front of the burning M10 became a killing zone. But artillery alone couldn't stop determined infantry. The Germans knew that. They'd survived artillery before. They pushed forward through the impacts, accepting casualties, committed to taking that machine gun position. Murphy tracked them with the .50 caliber. He'd fire, adjust, fire again. The machine gun was heating up. The barrel was designed to handle sustained fire, but this was beyond sustained. This was constant. The metal was starting to glow. The Germans tried to flank left. Murphy swiveled the gun 30 degrees and cut down the flanking element. 8 men fell in the frozen mud. The Germans tried to flank right. Murphy traversed back and caught them in the open. The .50 caliber rounds went through 2 men before stopping. The German assault formations were breaking apart, soldiers diving for whatever cover they could find. Tree stumps, dead tanks, shell craters from the artillery. 20 minutes in, Murphy's uniform started smoking. The M10's fuel fire was spreading. The flames had reached the turret. The metal Murphy was standing on was hot enough to burn through boot leather. The smoke was thick enough to choke on. The ammunition storage in the hole could cook off any second. Murphy felt the heat through his clothes, smelled burning wool and leather, tasted smoke and cordite and the metallic tang of blood. His lip had split from the cold, and he hadn't noticed. The field telephone crackled. "We're running low on ammunition," the artillery officer said. "Can you adjust fire to preserve shells?" Murphy looked at the German formation. They weren't stopping. They were regrouping, preparing another push. He could see officers rallying men, pointing at the burning M10. "Negative," Murphy said. "Keep it coming. I'll tell you when to stop." The Germans attacked again. This time they came from multiple directions simultaneously. A coordinated assault that should have overwhelmed a single gun position. Murphy traversed the .50 caliber back and forth, firing at each threat in turn. The gun's barrel was cherry red now. The heat shimmer made aiming difficult. Murphy compensated by instinct, the same way he'd compensated for wind when shooting squirrels as a child. Lead the target, squeeze, traverse, lead, squeeze, traverse. Men fell, more came. He fired again. The ammunition belt ran dry. He slapped in a new belt without looking down, hands moving by feel, eyes never leaving the target. 4 seconds to reload. 4 seconds when he wasn't firing. 4 seconds the Germans used to gain ground. He opened fire again and drove them back. A German officer stood up behind a shell crater, waving a pistol, screaming at his men to advance. Murphy put a 3-round burst through his chest. The officer went down and didn't move. The men around him looked at each other. Some of them started crawling backward. Murphy shifted fire to the ones still moving forward. The mathematics were turning. Every dead German was 1 less rifle shooting at him. Every wounded German was 2 more. The wounded man and whoever had to drag him to safety. Murphy was making the mathematics work. 30 minutes in, they shot him. A German rifleman got close enough, 70 yards, and put a bullet through Murphy's right leg. The bullet went in the calf and out the other side, a through-and-through wound that hurt immediately and badly. Murphy's leg buckled. He grabbed the machine gun mount to keep from falling off the tank destroyer. Blood soaked into his boot, hot and wet. The pain was white and sharp and absolute. He kept firing. The leg wound didn't matter. The burning tank destroyer didn't matter. The 200 Germans still advancing didn't matter. What mattered was the phone in his left hand and the gun in his right, and the job that needed doing. Murphy had been hungry as a child. He'd been so hungry that shooting dinner wasn't optional. It was survival, and you didn't get to stop hunting just because your feet hurt, or the weather was bad, or you were tired. That lesson had gone bone deep. It had become part of who he was. You don't stop because it hurts. You stop when the job is done. Murphy called in more artillery. "Drop 5-0, he said, 50 yards closer. The shells were landing so close now that shrapnel was zinging off the tank destroyer's hull. One fragment caught Murphy's shoulder, tore through his jacket. He didn't notice. He was firing the .50 caliber at a German squad that was trying to advance under cover of smoke. The machine gun cut through the smoke, and the squad stopped advancing. German after-action reports, the ones that survived the war, described the attack on Company B's position as encountering American resistance of unexpected intensity. They reported heavy casualties from artillery and machine gun fire. They reported that the assault stalled against a reinforced position with at least platoon-strength elements and heavy weapons. The German company commander who survived estimated they'd been fighting against at least 30 Americans with multiple machine gun positions. It was one man, one gun, and fury forged in Texas poverty. 40 minutes in, the ammunition started cooking off. The M10's internal ammunition storage was heating up from the fuel fire. Small arms rounds began detonating inside the hull. Pop, 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 not explosions. Ammunition needs to be chambered in a gun barrel to create explosion. But the rounds were cooking off, bullets and shell casings expanding in the heat, cracking open, adding to the fire. Murphy felt the hull vibrate with each detonation. He knew what came next. Eventually, the fire would reach the high explosive shells. When that happened, the M10 would detonate with enough force to vaporize him. He called in more artillery instead of climbing down. "Repeat last fire mission," he said into the telephone. His voice was still calm. The artillery officer on the other end couldn't see the burning tank destroyer, couldn't see Murphy standing on it, leg bleeding, uniform smoking, machine gun glowing. He just heard the calm voice calling coordinates and corrections. The Germans tried one more major push. 50 men, maybe more, came out of cover and rushed the tank destroyer. This wasn't tactics anymore. This was desperation. This was officers who knew they'd be shot if they retreated without taking the objective. 50 men, screaming, rifles firing, running across frozen ground toward one man on a burning wreck. Murphy traversed the .50 caliber to the center of the formation and held down the trigger. The machine gun fired for 12 seconds. 60 rounds. thumb-sized bullets moving at 3,000 feet per second. The front rank of the German charge disintegrated. Men fell on top of each other. The survivors stumbled over bodies, lost momentum, went to ground. Murphy released the trigger. The gun barrel was white-hot, warped from the heat. It might burst if he fired it again. He fired it anyway. Short bursts now, 2-3 rounds at a time, picking off any German who tried to move. The charge broke. The survivors crawled backward, dragged wounded men with them, abandoned rifles and equipment in their desperation to get away from that impossible gun. Murphy called in one more artillery strike. The German formation was pulling back now, withdrawing in disorder. The artillery caught them in the open. High explosive shells walked across the field like the footsteps of an angry god. More men went down. The Germans broke and ran. 50 minutes had passed since Murphy climbed onto the burning tank destroyer. The American counterattack launched. Murphy's men came out of the woods. They'd watched him for 50 minutes. Watched him stand on that burning wreck. Watched him hold off an entire German company alone. Now they advanced through the artillery smoke, rifles ready, moving fast while the Germans were still disorganized. They swept through the German positions. The Wehrmacht soldiers who could run did. The ones who couldn't surrendered or died. Murphy finally climbed down from the M10. His right leg gave out when he hit the ground. He collapsed in the frozen mud. His men reached him, shouted for a medic. Murphy looked up at them, squinted against the smoke and pain. "How many?" his executive officer asked. "I don't know," Murphy said. His voice was hoarse from smoke and shouting. "All of them I could." They carried him back to the tree line. A medic cut away his boot, exposed the leg wound. The bullet had gone clean through the calf, missed the bone. Lucky. Murphy would walk again. The medic wrapped the wound, gave Murphy a shot of morphine that Murphy refused twice before accepting. His uniform was burned in patches. His hands were blistered from the hot machine gun. His face was black with smoke and powder residue. He looked like he'd been pulled from a fire, which, technically, he had been. The M10 tank destroyer exploded 20 minutes later. The fire had finally reached the high explosive shells in the ammunition storage. The blast was loud enough that Murphy heard it from the aid station. A pillar of fire and smoke rose into the gray January sky. Pieces of the tank destroyer fell across 200 yards of frozen field. Murphy had stood on top of it for an hour. They counted the German dead when the field was secured. 240 casualties. Killed or wounded badly enough that they couldn't retreat. 240 men. 43 killed outright, the rest wounded in various degrees. The rest of the German company, maybe 10 men, had escaped. Murphy had been responsible for nearly all of it. The artillery had done damage, yes, but the artillery had only fired where Murphy told it to fire. The machine gun had been all him. Every round, every target, 1 man, 1 hour. The mathematics said it was impossible. The dead Germans said otherwise. The field evacuation hospital was 12 miles behind the lines. They took Murphy there in an ambulance that bounced over frozen roads and made his leg throb with each pothole. The doctors examined him, confirmed the leg wound was clean, started him on sulfa powder to prevent infection. They wanted to send him to the rear hospital. They wanted to send him all the way to England, maybe back to the States. Medical discharge with honors. "You've done enough, Lieutenant. You can go home." Murphy refused. The doctors argued. Murphy was polite but immovable. His company was still in the line. His men needed him. He'd walk again in a few weeks. The bullet had missed everything important. A month of recovery, maybe 2, and he'd be ready to return to duty. They couldn't force him to accept medical retirement. Not legally. Not when he could still pass a fitness evaluation once the leg healed. The doctors gave up. Murphy was transferred to a hospital in France for recovery. He spent 6 weeks learning to walk without a limp, exercising the leg until it could carry his weight again. The morphine helped at first, then it didn't. He stopped taking it. Pain was just information. Information about tissue damage and nerve signals and healing progress. You could work with information. He returned to Company B in March 1945. The Colmar Pocket had been cleared by then. The German defenders had been killed or captured or pushed back across the Rhine. The 3rd Infantry Division was preparing to cross into Germany itself. Murphy's men greeted him like a ghost come back from the dead. They didn't talk about what he'd done on that burning tank destroyer. Combat soldiers don't talk about that sort of thing, not directly. But they looked at him differently, respectfully. The way you look at someone who did something you're not sure you could have done. Murphy wore his decorations when required and said nothing when not required. The Medal of Honor recommendation had already been submitted. It worked its way up through Division, Corps, Army Command. The paperwork was processed. The citations were verified. The witnesses gave statements. The German casualty reports were reviewed. Everything checked out. Everything was documented. This wasn't myth. This was recorded fact. On June 6, 1945, at a ceremony in France, Major General John W. O'Daniel presented First Lieutenant Audie Murphy with the Medal of Honor. The citation read in part, Second Lieutenant Audie L. Murphy commanded Company B, which was attacked by 6 tanks and waves of infantry. Lieutenant Murphy ordered his men to withdraw to prepared positions in a woods, while he remained forward at his command post and continued to give fire directions to the artillery by telephone. Behind him, to his right, one of our tank destroyers received a direct hit and began to burn. Its crew withdrew to the woods. Lieutenant Murphy continued to direct artillery fire, which killed large numbers of the advancing enemy infantry. With the enemy tanks abreast of his position, Lieutenant Murphy climbed on the burning tank destroyer, which was in danger of blowing up at any moment, and employed its .50 caliber machine gun against the enemy. He was alone and exposed to German fire from 3 sides, but his deadly fire killed dozens of Germans and caused their infantry attack to waver. The enemy tanks, losing infantry support, began to fall back. For an hour, the Germans tried every available weapon to eliminate Lieutenant Murphy, but he continued to hold his position and wiped out a squad that was trying to creep up unnoticed on his right flank. Germans reached as close as 10 yards, only to be mowed down by his fire. He received a leg wound, but ignored it and continued his single-handed fight until his ammunition was exhausted. He then made his way back to his company, refused medical attention, and organized the company in a counterattack, which forced the Germans to withdraw. The citation was careful with numbers. 50 was what could be definitively confirmed by multiple sources. The actual count was closer to 240. But military citations don't speculate, they document. 50 was enough. Murphy became the most decorated American soldier of World War II. Medal of Honor, Distinguished Service Cross, 2 Silver Stars, Legion of Merit, 2 Bronze Stars, 3 Purple Hearts, 20 more decorations from the U.S. military and foreign governments. France awarded him the Legion of Honor and Croix de Guerre. Belgium gave him the Croix de Guerre. Murphy wore them all at official functions and forgot them all otherwise. The war ended. Murphy went home. Murphy returned to Texas a hero, but struggled with what the Army called battle fatigue. He became Hollywood's most decorated actor, starring in 44 films including To Hell and Back, where he played himself, standing on that burning tank destroyer one more time, this time for cameras. His memoir became a bestseller, but his greatest contribution was breaking the silence around veteran mental health. He publicly discussed his nightmares, his loaded pistol under his pillow, the hypervigilance that never quite faded. In the 1950s, when admitting psychological wounds meant weakness, Murphy used his Medal of Honor credibility to change that conversation. He pioneered advocacy that would eventually lead to PTSD recognition and treatment. On May 28, 1971, Murphy died in a plane crash near Roanoke, Virginia. He was 45. The military buried him at Arlington National Cemetery with full honors. His headstone is simple, identical to every other, no special treatment, just another soldier. He'd insisted on that. What happened at Holtzwihr on January 26, 1945, changed American infantry doctrine. The Army studied Murphy's artillery coordination from an exposed position, his ability to direct fire while under direct enemy fire. His actions became a case study at West Point and officer candidate schools, not because they were teaching officers to stand on burning tank destroyers, but because they were teaching what's possible when leadership, skill, and desperate courage meet at the right moment. The tactical lessons from that one-hour stand influenced how American infantry officers were trained to integrate artillery support for decades. The Colmar Pocket was cleared within 3 weeks of Murphy's stand. German resistance in Alsace collapsed. The American and French forces pushed forward, crossed the Rhine, entered Germany itself. That 1 hour stand didn't win the war, but it held a line when the line needed holding. It stopped a German counteroffensive that could have delayed the Allied advance by weeks. In war, weeks cost lives. Murphy's stand saved lives. Murphy's philosophy was simple. I was just doing my job. Anyone would have done the same. He said it in interviews, he said it at ceremonies. He said it when people called him a hero. He believed it. Most people who've done truly heroic things believe it. They can't see themselves the way others see them. They only see what needed doing and how they did it. But anyone wouldn't have done the same. Most men would have withdrawn with the rest of the company. Most men would have accepted that 250 Germans with tank support simply couldn't be stopped by one soldier. Most men would have made the rational, sensible, survival-oriented decision. Murphy made a different calculation. He looked at the burning tank destroyer and saw a weapon. He looked at his wounded leg and saw an acceptable cost. He looked at 250 Germans and saw targets. That's not normal. That's not how most people are wired. Murphy was wired differently, shaped by hungry Texas winters, hunting rabbits to feed siblings, by 3 years of continuous combat, by whatever genetic lottery determines who can function when adrenaline is screaming at every cell to run. 1 man, 1 hour, 240 casualties. The numbers are precise. The documentation is thorough. The witnesses survived. The after-action reports exist, American and German. This isn't legend embellished over generations. This is recorded history verified by multiple independent sources. It happened exactly the way the citations describe it. Audie Murphy stood on a burning tank destroyer for 1 hour and killed more enemy soldiers than most infantry companies kill in entire wars. He did it while wounded. He did it while coordinating artillery fire, danger close to his position. He did it knowing the tank destroyer could explode at any second. He did it alone, and when it was over, he climbed down and asked for work to do. That's the lesson if there is one. Not that violence solves problems. Violence created most of the problems Murphy faced. Not that war is glorious. Murphy spent decades dealing with the psychological cost of what he'd seen and done. The lesson is simpler and older. When you're standing on burning steel with Germans coming from 3 sides and your leg is bleeding and every rational calculation says you should run. Sometimes the only thing left to do is load another belt and keep shooting. Sometimes impossible is just another word for Tuesday. If you found this story as compelling as we did, please take a moment to like this video. It helps us share more forgotten stories from the Second World War. Subscribe to stay connected with these untold histories. Each one matters. Each one deserves to be remembered. And we'd love to hear from you. Leave a comment below telling us where you're watching from. Our community spans from Texas to Tasmania, from veterans to history enthusiasts. You're part of something special here. Thank you for watching, and thank you for keeping these stories alive.